All right, everyone, it's about time we got down and serious because we need to answer this question. Should you arch when you press? This is an age-old question. This is a question that I've heard since my very first days lifting, and a lot of people seem to be very confident about one answer to the question. And the only confident answer that I can give to this question is, it depends. So today we're going to talk about what it depends on. And we'll start from sort of first principle thinking rather than one particular dogma or another. For instance, as it relates to this question, some people say, don't arch. If you arch, oh my God, the pec gains that you would have acquired rather are lost. Just forget about it. It's all front delt if you arch. It's all triceps if you arch. Heaven forbid. And even maybe a worse claim than that is suggesting that it's somehow dysfunctional. Anyway, and then on the other end of the spectrum, people say, don't you dare not arch when you press, because arching is the foundation of stability. So who's correct? Well, who's correct depends on the context. So let's start by talking about that. Or actually, what I should say is let's start by talking about the first principles and then let's talk about the context. So what are the first principles? Well, they're basically just the more broad concepts that we can use to answer these questions more specifically. So what is arching would be the first question to ask here, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily ask that. Arching, in most cases, refers to lifting of the ribs like this and arching of the back, which is known as spinal extension. If I go like this to stick my butt out for an Instagram photo, that is arching spinal extension. It's where the joints on the back side of the spine kind of close, and because they close, the back arches and the pelvis can kind of tip a little bit forward like that, okay? Cool, it's the booty pose. Rounding or spine flexion would be the opposite of that. So when people say don't arch, what they're really referring to is just being in a more neutral or spine flex position where they exhale, the ribs come down and kind of inward. So we have these two extremes of ribs sort of upward and outward, and then ribs sort of downward and inward, and that is coupled with the spine motion of arching and rounding relative to what I described. Cool. So what is that doing in the context of a press? Well, let's just imagine, I'm actually gonna trade places with you here, Frank. Imagine we are doing some kind of press, and the arm is gonna be horizontal. It's gonna end up like this because let's say it's a dumbbell press, okay? If it's a dumbbell press at this angle and this person is in this position, we could ask ourselves, in this particular path, like let's just assume someone uses a wider arm path like this, and so they're ending up here. What will be recruited in this exercise? Well, if they end up here and they come out to here, well, with a little bit of a wider arm path, the upper half of the pecs are going to be a little bit more stretched. And if they end up somewhere over here, you can imagine that this point and sort of somewhere up here are coming the closest together, right? Because if the arm is somewhere up here stacked, then the lower pecs are actually going to, from this point, pull the arm downward and inward. So this would be a kind of upper pec, upper shelf exercise where if someone were doing this, that's where they'd end up. But what would happen to this individual if they arched their back more during this press? Well, what would happen is the arm would stay in the exact same position because it has to relative to gravity in a dumbbell press or a barbell press, right? But the rib position would move. So instead of the ribs staying here, I'll move the arm up in just a second again, the ribs will go like this. Okay, so this right here is arching. Spinal extension, okay? So if the upper arm stays right here, which I'm gonna do, just hold it on me now, and the ribs come upward, what is essentially happening is in terms of the relative position we're looking at, the arm is actually moving lower down now. So in essence, what arching the back does when your arms are fixed is it moves the line of force and the resistance that you're acting against more in line with the lower pecs. Why? Because it's basically the same thing as taking your arms from here and moving them here to do a press. So if this is the first thing we looked at, when I arched Frank, in this case, when I'm now arching myself, what I'm doing is I'm basically just moving my arms to a relative position where they're more in line with the lower chest. Why? Well, because if I keep my arms here and I arch, do you all see how I'm gonna fix myself now and then boop, right? So all you're doing by creating more spinal extension in this context is you're shifting the recruitment from more of the upper chest to more of the lower chest. Why? Because the arm is ending up lower here. And when it's in that more stretched position back here, the lower pecs are going to be more in line with the resistance, because again, it's basically the same thing, compared to cable presses. Imagine you did a cable press right here, and then imagine you move the cables up behind you, and then you did a cable press here. That is the same change in essence that you're making when you go from less arched to more arched. Now, what if you go in the other direction? What if you start here and then for whatever reason you go and you bring your ribs down, you exhale, you flex your spine? Well, the inverse would be true, right? Because all that this is doing, let's say the ribs are kind of like here, if the ribs come down and the spine flexes, all that's happening effectively at a certain point, I'm not going to be able to move Frank further, but all that's really happening is the arm is moving from lower to higher. And so what happens as you move from middle to lower to middle to higher, well, eventually you're going to move more into upper pec territory compared to lower pec territory, and where eventually if you end up somewhere like this, you're going to get a lot of front delt and a lot of triceps, which is why when people over round, right, they're over rounding like this, if they end up like this, just think about what this really is. Okay, I'm going to keep this position. Do you all see that, right? I'm basically just doing a high incline press. So it's no wonder that someone would feel their shoulders if they were constantly doing this on a flat press. Okay, so what we've covered so far is that arching and rounding, spinal extension, spinal flexion, respectively, is basically a way to change the sternum and the rib position so that the upper arm can be loaded differently. If we arch more, we create more of a lower pec bias in general. If we arch less, we shift the focus upward. Okay, now where the trickiness comes into this conversation is when people start to give anecdotes about how I went from this thing, I went from arching all my life, and now because of XYZ person's content I've consumed, they told me to stop arching. Now I feel my pecs way more. Okay, it is possible for that to happen. Much in the same way that it is possible for many people to go from arching less to arching more and feeling better going in that direction. The bias here is really where are people starting from? Really, the bias that is created rather in people's experiences is solely dependent on their starting point. So if someone is used to just perpetually arching all the time on everything for every exercise, and then you tell them, hey, I want you to be like a little bit looser with your shoulder blade motion. I want you to like stack your ribs a little bit better. What you're doing is you're basically just introducing a variation of the chest exercises they've been doing that they've just never done before, right? They're basically just now checking a box that has never been checked. And so people may see improved growth or new growth or accelerated growth, whatever it happens to be. It's probably happening simply because of just a few subtle positional changes. One that may just allow you to say, if you're the person who's always arching, i.e. you're always doing some kind of decline press, it may just allow you to target your upper chest more because you're letting go of the need or the thought that you need to arch all the time. And sort of inverse from that, if you're someone who never has arched before, you don't even know how to extend your spine, you're someone who's just constantly, slumpy all over the place. And you go from these kinds of presses all your life to like, oh, I can actually get a chest, proud position, and I can actually train my chest. Holy crap, because I'm not overly flexed and basically doing an incline press at all times, right? If that's you, then you will go from feeling worse with the sort of flatness, the flat back, to then better with the arch. So one isn't better than the other. It depends on two things. It depends on what is your muscular target relative to the exercise. And in addition to that, what is your comfort level in the position? Because a lot of people, they arch and arch and arch and arch and arch, and they get so used to arching that they can't like control their tissues in any other position. So the second that they try to do something else, it's like they don't have the variability or the skill to perform those other exercises comfortably. That is a person who may benefit from intentionally using a little bit more of a flatter back type of press or fly or anything like that. And again, vice versa for the person who has never arched during a press in their life, and so they can't feel their lower chest. All they feel is upper chest and shoulders and triceps. So different strokes for different folks, and the important takeaway here is that it depends, and it depends on all those things, and it also depends on what you're comfortable and capable of doing. Arching and rounding are not like one-to-one mappings onto what you're targeting. So for instance, if you arch a lot in a press, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're automatically targeting more lower chest, and vice versa for a more flat back type of thing. Why? Well, because imagine, you're on an incline press and you're arching the shit out of your back. Well, you may still be pressing at an angle that is high enough to be super upper pec dominant, and or in the instance of a decline press, even if you have a flat back, you may be pressing at such an angle that's really lower pec dominant. So it's not that arch back equals more lower pec and flat back equals more upper pec. It's just that if you have a position, you fix the position, and then you move the spine, those are the relative changes that occur. The last thing that I did want to talk about is just the influence of the shoulder girdle mechanics as it relates to these concepts. So one thing to note is that with the decline pressing variation, with the more arch back stuff, the shoulder blades will have a tendency to want to move in line with where the arm is. So if you're really arched, again, which is just the same as me saying I'm doing more of this thing, your shoulder blades are going to want to move upward and backward in the top position and then downward and forward. Many people think this shrugging type of motion and retraction is a bug rather than a feature, but it's actually a feature. When your shoulder blades go all the way back, which is what happens with something like a dip, let's say, they also actually go up. Those things are paired actions. They do not go back and down in this fully retracted position, contrary to what a lot of people have been taught. You've been lied to, at least in some instances. So when people arch more, that is the sort of more natural path. So if you're going to arch on stuff, make sure that you are allowing your shoulder blades to move back and up and then down and forward. However, if you're not going to arch on stuff, and this is, I think, where people might feel some sort of pain relief in certain instances, going from a more arched position to a more flat back or rounded position, is a lot of times because of the fact that the person is no longer arched and they're no longer maybe actively squeezing their shoulder blades, people's shoulder blades tend to have an easier time moving forward, right? Because the angle sort of allows for it, right? So think about it this way, just do a test yourself. If your arms are at this angle, i.e. you're doing a decline press, see how far forward you can reach. You'll notice that you kind of get stuck, right? I can't really move forward, right? But watch what happens the second that you put your arm up here. You all see how much room you have to reach forward. So just giving people a little bit of room to actually protract and reach can feel really good on people's shoulders if they're perpetually stuck in the cycle of not being able to protract at all. Why would they not be able to protract on a decline? Well, because these bones just run downward into the ribs, whereas when your arms are here, these bones can slide nice and forward and backward. So overall, these are just considerations that you need to make relative to the context. And what you choose to do, arching or rounding, is dependent on that context and the sort of broader factors around the exercise. Do you have pain? Are you comfortable? Are these exercises progressing in the way that you want? So I hope that was helpful. If it was, please let me know in a comment. Ask any questions you have relative to this, and I'll see you all in the next video. Oh, and if you didn't order my ebook, check the link in the description. Just came out, brand new. Hope you all enjoy it.